this computer, okay. And please keep your microphones muted. If you have a question, please type it in the chat box. And the evaluation for this webinar, you can either use this QR code in the corner right here on your phone and just like kind of hold it up to your phone with your camera. And you can click the link for that, or you can go to this link right here, the go.illinois.edu/EENLC strategies. This will be, the evaluations will be available at the end to see, and we'll email them to you as well. But if you have to leave early, or if you know you're going to have to leave early, we still want you to evaluate us and help give us insight into how useful this webinar was for you. So please go do that afterwards. So again, this is part 2 of a 2-part webinar series on natural lawn care. Today we'll be talking about the strategies. Last week we really talked about assessment. Don't worry if you missed out on part 1, it will be posted on YouTube. And anything that we addressed today that maybe needed a little more information from part 1, we'll still give that a little bit of a talk about, just so you won't feel lost basically if you missed part 1. So don't stress about that. So this workshop is a collaboration between Illinois Extension and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. As we mentioned, so Sea Grant provided a lot of the content, and Allison has been working with us to make this workshop and this webinar a really rich experience for you all. And so Gemini, Allison, and I worked collaboratively to develop this, and I think it's going to provide some really good information for you. Now, we did send you all a link to a resource folder that provides all these resources on natural lawn care. I'm just going to point out a few. The first one right here, this is what the box folder looks like, is the Lawn to Lake Guidebook. It's really useful. I think Allison just posted it in the chat too, so if you can't find it in your email, that's totally fine. This is where a lot of this content comes from. And so if you're ever like, oh, I can't remember that one thing they said about IPM, like there's an IPM section in this book. So it's really great. There's also a bunch of handouts on other topics to explain things a little further. And then this document right here says assessment document is something that you'll want to be able to access because we'll be making a lawn care action plan today. So this is where that action plan is located, is under this titled assessment document. If you were here for part 1, this folder will look very familiar, as well as this assessment document will look very familiar as well. I'm just going to quickly breeze through this, but this is a part of our Conservation at Home program in which we promote conservation landscape practices. And we do that through this workshop right here, so public programming on a practice such as natural lawn care, and we also certify property owners. Our program itself is in Cook County, but there's a couple of other conservation programs in other counties. In like the Northeast region of Illinois, there's one in like East St. Louis area. It just kind of depends, but there's a lot of conservation programs that support practices such as natural lawn care, and I encourage you to look for them in your own county. As I have mentioned, Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, I keep throwing that around. Allison works for Sea Grant as well. And that may be like, well, I've never heard of that before. That seems kind of confusing. It's an outreach organization, publicly funded, and it focuses on outreach and education issues that affect the Great Lakes. So one of those programs that they do that Allison works on specifically is the Lawn to Lakes program, which promotes water quality through natural lawn care, which is what we'll be addressing today. So why natural lawn care? And this will be a little bit of a repeat if you were in the part 1 of the series, but essentially, we want to reiterate that, our lawns affect more than just our own properties. There's a more widespread effect. And so we care about our lawns because of watersheds. Now, a watershed is an area of land in which all the water drains into a single body of water. So the rainfall up here on this landscape drains into this river. Any water that goes on, any irrigation that goes on these residential properties is going to make its way to this river. This farm, same thing. So all of this area is considered a watershed. All of us, every single one of us, I guarantee you, if you're in this webinar, if you're a person, you are living in a watershed, because watersheds are just what make up Illinois and every other state in the United States. And so most of our watersheds drain into the Mississippi River over here. They'll drain this direction, but over here in the Northeast, they actually drain into the Great Lakes. So it just kind of depends on where you are, but a lot of the water in Illinois drains into the Mississippi River. Now, why does that matter for our lawns? Because lawns are the largest irrigated crop in the US. 40 million acres of turf grass are in the US. Now, to give you a little bit reference for that, Illinois is 37 million acres in size. That means that we have 3 million more acres of turf grass than the size of the state of Illinois. And not only do we have a lot of it, but we actually have more than irrigated corn. And if you're from downstate like me, or central Illinois, I guess, then you're like, well, how is that possible? There's a cornfield in my backyard. Well, for every cornfield, there's three lawns. So it's 3 times more turf grass than irrigated corn. So it's a big number. We have a lot of it, and we use a lot on our lawns. Not only do we use a lot of water, but we are putting a lot of chemicals, including fertilizers, pesticides, and we're putting a lot of energy into our lawns. So 580 million gallons of gasoline just into our lawnmowers. So we're doing a lot of input. So this natural lawn care piece and reducing our inputs are going to be really helpful, not only it seems on our earth, but also on our wallets. I don't know about you, but 580 million gallons of gasoline is a lot of money too. So there's a lot of consideration that we can make when it comes to reducing our impact. Now, that question is first though, what is natural lawn care? Well, I like to think of it as a comparison to conventional approach to lawn care. So natural lawn care takes a more diagnostic approach. So it treats problems, not symptoms. And once it's diagnosed the problem, then it addresses it with natural or organic products, but only when needed. And so we talked about this a lot in part 1, and this is why we devoted a whole webinar just to assessment, because it's really important to figure out what's wrong before you start and try and fix it. A conventional approach, on the other hand, focuses more on a one-size-fits-all. A lot of the times when you think of a conventional approach, there's usually like a very specific schedule to it. It's treating symptoms for short-term fixes. So a really good example I like to think of this is when you compare watering with conventional lawns versus natural lawns. A conventional watering approach would be to irrigate, every morning for a certain number of time or a certain amount of time, no matter what. A natural lawn care approach first figures out, well, how much rain has come down? Then I need to figure out how much I water. So they may not need to water every day because they've figured out that the lawn doesn't need any more water. So that's kind of some differences between the two. Today we'll be looking at specific strategies for natural lawn care. So, this is assuming that you've already assessed, you've figured out what your lawn needs, you have a soil test, things like that. And after that, now you can start to use some of these strategies. So we'll be looking at mowing, water management, looking at some fertilizers, some general maintenance practices, integrated pest management or IPM, and then we'll actually look at some strategies that go beyond the lawn. So I told you that we will be looking back at that assessment document again. This is what the first page of that looks like. And if you were in part 1, this will look really familiar, right? We looked at this very in depth, how you can assess. And if you weren't in part 1, I still encourage you to try to fill this out because it's so important to help you figure out where you want to go for this next part. Now, the other page of that document, so this is a 2-page document, here's the assessment. And this next one is the action plan document. Now I'm going to break it down just a little bit to show you what it looks like. So at the top here, you see instructions that say circle 1 to 3 goals that you want to focus on this next year. We like to have a goals approach when it comes to natural lawn care, or figuring out how you're going to manage your lawn in general. So it helps you kind of focus in on what you're trying to do, as opposed to a all-in approach. Sometimes it's a little easier if you focus on specific goals. Now these goals, we listed 8 of them, but we left an option for number 9, which is other, in case something there was something that was not really covered in these 8 goals. So we talk about managing weeds. Is your goal to manage pests and diseases? Water. Do you have too much or too little water? Nutrients. Let's say you have to fertilize a lot, or you're noticing your grass doesn't look as healthy and maybe it's because of nutrients. Improved maintenance practices. Maybe you want to make sure that you're good at maintaining your lawn. You're struggling with that regular maintenance piece. Maybe you want to reduce your lawn area. That's something that you're interested in doing. Or you found you're just spending a lot of money on your lawn and you're like, I don't want to spend as much. Let's reduce those costs. And then lastly, appearance. Lawns are very attractive looking in a yard, and you might want to improve that appearance and make them look the way you have it imagined. So all of these are options for you to focus on. Now I understand these goals can be integrated a little bit, right? Because if you're managing for pests and diseases or weeds, that also probably improves the appearance of your lawn. I would encourage you to pick the one that resonates the most with you, that you're like, this is why I'm doing it, to improve the appearance. Not because the weeds bother me, but because I want it to look good or something like that. But we also say I would circle 1 to 3, or choose 1 to 3 that you want to focus on. So I'm going to give you a minute to look over these and just pick in your head, or if you have the PDF up and you want to check the boxes, pick 1 to 3 goals that you were like, this is why I walked in here today. And if it's other, do that as well. So I'm going to zoom in here to the top of this sheet just so you can see it a little better. And you'll notice that a majority of the sheet has lines on it. That's because this is an action plan for you. So this line right here says goal 1, and this is where you'll write one of those goals that you just chose. Maybe it was water management. Then throughout the rest of this presentation, or later on, whatever, you'll want to fill in those strategies that we've talked about and the timing of them. So it'll be important to kind of look at that and figure out, that way you have some strategies that specifically address your own goals. So this is what this could look like in real life, if you were writing it on a piece of paper. Now granted, the fillable PDF might look a little different, but to circle it, things like that. This individual wanted to focus on water management, and so they wrote down these strategies that were pulled directly from our presentation, and then they gave timings around it. So they were like, I definitely want to make sure I leave my grass clippings during when I'm mowing, which is spring to fall. And then they're interested in installing a rain barrel at a downspout to address water issues in the early summer. So there are different strategies that you would specifically put in here. The important thing to note is that this plan is for you. There's no right or wrong way of filling this out. This individual, for example, was like, I want to make sure I reference where it is to help me remember why this is such a good strategy. So they even put a page number from the Lawn to Lakes guidebook. So this is really for you. And the same goes for the timings. If you need to put a specific date, do a specific date. If you're more of a person who's like, I'm gonna do it around Mother's Day or so, or it's, around May or the summer, that's fine too. But this is for you to help you create an action plan. So just to kind of reiterate, so I have a question for you all, and I'm going to pull up a poll, and I'm going to launch it. And the question is, what goals would you like to focus on in 2020? And you can choose 1 to 3 of them. I encourage you not to do more than 3, just because that can be a lot. But click 1 to 3 that you think are things that you want to focus on, just so we can get a better idea of who's in our webinar today. Excellent. I see. So it's slowing down a little bit. I'm going to give us about maybe 10 more seconds to answer. And if you were one of those people who decided, none of these really help address what you want, I would encourage you to write the other that you want to address in the group chat, just so we can see, what are you here for today? So while people are typing, if they had any other goals that they wanted to address, that maybe they checked that box number 9, I noticed, and I'm sharing the results, that a lot of people are here to manage weeds. But another thing people are here for is appearance, making their lawns look really nice, and improved maintenance practices. So just making their general maintenance look like a more regular schedule, or just improving it in general and making it more sound. And that's really wonderful. So I'm really excited. I think we're going to address some of those things today. So I'm going to stop sharing these results. Close out. Okay, so we're going to get into these specific strategies. And the first one that we will look at is mowing. Now, if you notice here, this is a heading slide, and at the bottom there's to address these goals. On each of the strategies that we'll be looking at, we put at the bottom the goals that could be addressed by using some of these strategies. And so that way, if that was one of your goals, was to manage pests and diseases, you might want to chirp your ears up just a little extra and make note of some of those strategies that we offer. Also, I apologize if you're hearing background noise. I think someone's like blowing leaves or something in my courtyard. So, okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is mowing. It's usually the first thing you think of when you come to a lawn, right? It's first thing I think of. It's the signs of spring is like the sound of a mower. And proper mowing is really important. If you're using certain strategies, you can actually help better manage your weeds and pests and diseases, help with water management, stormwater issues, reduce your costs, improve your appearance, and just have overall improved maintenance practices. So the first thing we'll look at with mowing is this 3-inch mowing height. It's really important to mow at 3 inches and not any lower. And this is really well demonstrated by this picture on the right here. So this is an image that shows on this left side says close mowing, and this right side says proper mowing height, which is about 3 inches. And you'll notice that the grass on the right has really nice, deeper roots and just looks generally healthier, especially below ground. So these deeper roots are help increase the health of the plant overall. Because there is more grass above the surface, more blades, there's more photosynthesis occurring, which allows more energy storage to happen below ground. Because there's more energy storage below ground, it helps reduce stress on the plant in the case that there is a little bit of a drier patch. These increased height also helps reduce or shade out the soil. And not only is it shading the soil, but it's shading out the weeds underneath. So it's helping get rid of some of your weeds from even popping up. And in addition to that, you're stopping water from evaporating as much from the top because you're shading out this soil here. And so not only are you stopping those weeds, but you're also saving money because you don't have to irrigate as much. And so there's a lot of benefits to mowing at this 3-inch height. Now, you'll notice here I have sharp blades save energy. I'm going to go a little bit more into that with this how. So we want to make sure we're mowing at 3 to 3.5 inches, and you want to only cut the top third at any time. Now, this means that you'll want to mow when your grass is about 4 inches tall. We've gotten questions about, well, what is that, like, how do I know it's 4.5 inches tall? Well, you can actually go out and just stick a ruler and measure the height of your grass that way. You'll want to use a sharp blade, and here's why. This grass right here was cut with a very dull blade. You notice it has like these brown edges at the top. It's not very appealing and good looking for appearance sake, if that's what you're in it for, right? So a duller blade will just kind of pull the top of it off, as opposed to a sharp blade will give it that really nice clean cut of your grass and not give this brown color. You'll want to sharpen your blade about after 14 hours of use. The next thing you'll want to do is leave your grass clippings. Now, this is a really wonderful strategy because it helps return the natural cycle of nutrients. So it returns organic matter back to the soil, which helps improve your aeration. It helps improve nitrogen back to the soil. And so these are free fertilizers. And contrary to popular belief, leaving your grass clippings does not cause thatch. But if you're worried that your grass clippings are still a little too large, you can always use a mulching lawnmower to cut them into smaller pieces. The next thing that we're going to address is water management. Water is always something at the forefront of our minds with lawns, and we either have too much or not enough, and sometimes that happens, you know, all in 1 month, depending on the where you are in Illinois. And so some of these strategies will help you address not only water management, but also help with nutrient management, improve your maintenance practices, and reduce some of your costs. So let's start with too much water, or with not enough water. So cool season grasses, which is what a majority of Illinoisans have in their yards, is they go dormant in the summer if they don't have enough water. Now, that's completely fine. Let your lawn go dormant in the summer. You only need to water, dormant lawns only need about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of water every 4 weeks. And that's if the weather's mild. If it is a hotter, drier summer, you'll maybe want to make sure that's every 2 weeks. Now, that's with rain. So you may not have to mow or to water or irrigate at all. Now, if you do choose to water, you'll want to water about 1 inch of water per week. But this includes rain. And you'll want to water really deeply. And that's really well demonstrated in this image here on the right. This grass right here was watered very shallowly in a short period of time and just given short bursts of water. And you'll notice the roots are really shallow. And this one image on the right, you'll notice has really deeper roots. And that's because the watering and the irrigation was done very frequent or very deeply. This plant is going to be a lot healthier and more resistant to drought than this plant because that water is more accessible down, or the plant can access the water all the way down here, as opposed to this one only has access to the water up here. And the soil will dry out from the top down, right? And so if the soil dries out here, which plant is going to be healthier? This one right here. If you don't have a rain gauge, you'll want to use a rain gauge, but if you don't have one, you can just use a can, and that gives you the same effects of understanding how much water that you're getting. If you do choose to water, you'll want to water in the morning. Now, the most important thing I want to note here about irrigation is that pick a plan and stick to it. So you'll want to make sure, if you are choosing to let your lawn go dormant in the summer, and that's the decision you make in the beginning of the summer, you need to stick to that choice. Because if you choose to water halfway through and then change your mind, your grass is not going to be very happy with you. And the same goes for the opposite. If you choose to water in the beginning of the summer and then all of a sudden you just stop, and then maybe, you know, a month or two later, you're like, yeah, I'm going to water some more, that's going to cause some problems with your grass. And so you'll want to make sure that you pick a plan and you stick to it. So let's talk about if you have too much water, right? That's our other issue. Well, there's a couple of things that you can do to address that. You can get a bioswale or a rain garden. You can build one of those in an area that you have a lot of pooling in your yard. Bioswales or rain gardens are a garden of plants that are really good at, really don't mind wet feet and have really deep roots. And so they are very good at helping the water infiltrate deeper into the soil. There's a lot of considerations that go into a rain garden, such as drainage, soil type, and location. So you'll definitely, if that's a solution that you really like, you'll definitely want to look into that more and do a little more research on how your property can have a rain garden and what kind of conditions you need. Another option is permeable pavers. This is a more drastic one, might be pretty expensive if you have a full concrete driveway, because replacing it could be pretty expensive. But if you're already going to do it anyways, consider permeable pavers if you have stormwater issues. Because it allows, again, it allows water to infiltrate the soil instead of flowing across the pavement. Another thing that you could do is redirecting your downspouts. Oh, back it up. If you are having them direct into, like onto your driveway or on a concrete impervious surface, you'll want it to direct it maybe to that rain garden that you're thinking about putting in, or into just a more permeable surface, such as certain areas of your lawn. And then the last one is rain barrels. If you you could direct it into a rain barrel and use the water that you collect from your roof all into other plants. If you have, like a garden bed, we don't recommend using rain barrel water on vegetables or edible plants, only because there could be some contaminants that are from your roof that you might not want to put in those beds. But for lawns, if you need to irrigate later in the summer, for that rain garden, if it, it needs more water, or for any other, like just flower beds, ornamentals, things like that, you can definitely use rain barrel water. If you're noticing here, the key thing really is to keep this water on your property and to help it infiltrate down. Because when you allow water to run off, you're going to take pollutants with it, first off, and second off, you might take some things that you really want on your lawn that you don't want the water to take with you, such as soil, nutrients that maybe you paid to put on your lawn. So you'll want to make sure that you're keeping the water on your property and allowing it to infiltrate down. All right, so let's look at fertilizers. So some of the strategies of a natural lawn care approach to fertilizers will help address weeds, pests, and diseases. It'll help you with water management, nutrient management, even will help you reduce costs and improve the appearance, as well as improved overall maintenance practices. So natural fertilizers is what we're going to start with. And we put quotations around fertilizers because, I guess they're considered fertilizers, but I don't really consider them, I don't consider them fertilizers really. But there's two options here. We already talked about grass clippings, right? They're returning the organic matter, the nitrogen back to the soil, and it's free. And again, I just want to reiterate, it does not cause thatch. The other option is compost or mulched leaves as a top dressing. This naturally increases the organic matter in your soil. It buffers it, that carbon and the decomposed matter helps allow for a more buffered with the pH, and it could be free depending on if you're making it. So let's just take a second and talk about composting. If you don't want to buy compost, you can make it for free with yard and kitchen waste. And composting is essentially, it's creating these conditions for decomposition of organic material. So kind of allowing that process to happen naturally, but also speeding it up a little bit. And so compost or humus can be used as a soil amendment. So if you are finding that you're having issues with, like I said, it's a fertilizer, your issues with compaction, maybe you have a really clay soil, you have a lot of pooling, compost will help with that. But it can also, like I said, serve as this top dressing or even a mulch. And then we talk about synthetic fertilizers when it comes to lawns. So if you don't like any of these options of the natural quote unquote fertilizers, synthetics are an option. This does increase the upfront costs compared to natural fertilizers. We do always recommend, if you're going to go with a synthetic, go with an organic fertilizer, but you want to make sure you're following some guidelines about application. And the first one is understanding how to read a fertilizer bag. And so you'll notice that there are 3 numbers on a bag, and they correspond with the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium ratio. That's N, P, and K. And that'll tell you the percentage of that nutrient in the bag. So, and then from that, it'll tell you how many pounds based on how many pounds the bag is. So, this example shows us that if it's a 100-pound bag, there's going to be 12 pounds of nitrogen, 3 pounds of phosphorus, and 10 pounds of potassium. The remaining 75 pounds, like they mentioned here, are just kind of other nutrients, maybe some fillers, things that help distribute the fertilizer. And so it's important that you're following the label though when it comes to application to help reduce runoff and to make sure that you're applying it appropriately. And first and foremost, especially with natural lawn care and any kind of fertilizer application, you'll want to make sure you apply based only on soil test results. A good example is that in Illinois, we have really high phosphorus levels in our soil. So we don't want to apply any phosphorus fertilizers. And so this number should essentially be 0 anytime you're adding a fertilizer to your lawn. Now, the best time to apply fertilizer is in the fall. Synthetic fertilizers is in the fall. And this chart kind of demonstrates that. So this chart shows us how cool season grasses grow. Here's the winter, these edges are the winter. Here's spring growth, here's summer stress, and then here's that fall growth or storage. And so these synthetic or quick release fertilizers are really quickly taken up by the plant. Therefore, we want them stored before dormancy. Fall fertilizing really promotes good root development, it enhances your lawn's energy reserves, and it extends the color retention. And the benefits of fall fertilization will be seen in the spring with this earlier green up, better turf density, and improved tolerance of turf grasses. So we want to make sure that we're adding that quick release fertilizer here. Now with those natural quote unquote fertilizers, well, those are slower release, and it's about soil improvement overall as opposed to like giving just nutrients to the plant. So those compost, the grass clippings, those can be added at any time. But we definitely do recommend the synthetics being added during fall storage period. So I'm going to pass it over to Gemini to cover maintenance.
Will you pass over the control, please? Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Let me just get this. Okay, thank you. So now I'll get started talking about maintenance. So we're going to move on to some other strategies. So we've already talked about a lot of maintenance, right? Mowing and some other things, but here are a few more. So these strategies that I'll talk about will address weed management, water management, nutrient management, improved just maintenance practices overall, reducing cost and appearance too. So first we're going to talk about aeration. So why would you aerate? Well, aeration, plants actually need air in the soil to grow. So roots don't grow in the soil exactly, they actually grow in the air spaces between soil particles. So what aeration does is it increases the air spaces and allows for more root growth to occur. So if you're looking at this picture here, you can see that by using an aerator, you're opening up these pore spaces and there's more room for these roots to grow. So it reduces compaction, which also sometimes benefits weeds and will also improve your water filtration. So when you're aerating, it's best to use a core aerator. You don't with shafts, with hollow shafts, not with spikes. So that way you're not just pushing the soil, but you're actually making space. You can rent an aerator from a hardware store and also share your rental with your neighbors. So you can also have this done by a landscape company or it can be just attached to a tiller too. So there is an upfront cost when it comes to aeration, but in the long term, it does reduce your costs in areas such as fertilizing, weed management, and irrigation. And luckily with renting, you could also share that cost with a neighbor. So you will want to aerate when the grass is growing and the soil is moist in the early spring and in the fall. So you can do it once or twice a year. So if you're doing it in late August, early September, you do want to combine with top dressing. And you can always leave the plugs, the extra soil in place because they break up in about a week or so once they dry out and then are usually pretty easy to rake in. So overseeding is great to do in combination with aeration too. The main goal of grass and of any other plant in that, for that matter, is to reproduce. So we cut that process short when we damage grass by actually mowing it. So eventually your lawn is going to age and die because it's not going to be healthy forever. So you have to add new seeds by overseeding occasionally. So this keeps your turf thick so it can outcompete weeds, and it makes your lawn look really nice, as well as reducing that cost for weed management. So the best time to overseed is in the fall, in mid to late August in Northern Illinois, and make sure to have really good contact with the seeds and the soil. So you can rake them and then also top dress with some sort of compost too. So next we're going to talk about IPM. So IPM, or Integrated Pest Management, is a way of managing weeds and diseases, and it addresses problems and not just the symptoms. So it puts a lot of these strategies together to target pests specifically. So it can help you with weeds, pests and diseases, improving your maintenance, reducing cost, and also with appearance. So integrated pest management is a strategy that's actually based in ecological theory. So there's this piece about interaction that's really important with IPM. So what IPM does is it uses the natural processes of an ecosystem to keep the pests and diseases in check before we use chemical control. So it's sort of like doing a lot of our maintenance practices that we already do, but to address a specific problem like a pest or disease. So IPM can be demonstrated through this pyramid here that's on your screen. So the strategies we do the strategies at the base of the pyramid first, and then move up as needed if our problem isn't addressed by the strategy before. So we'll start with cultural here that forms the base of the pyramid. So cultural management focuses on preventing or minimizing pest problems by having healthy plants, because healthy plants have less problems. So we want to be sure that we're selecting the proper plant for the site. Some other pieces might also be planting correctly, preparing your soil, fertilizing, and watering too. So having good growing practices. Another big piece of cultural IPM methods is also monitoring for your pests and diseases. So we're never going to have 100% disease or pest-free lawn, but we do want to make sure that the damage is as minimal as possible. So next we have physical or mechanical management. So this involves physically eliminating the pests, so weeding, cultivating, hand picking the pest. Next, we have biological. So biological involves utilizing another living organism to manage the pest using predators, parasites, or diseases. So this strategy actually involves introducing these other organisms. So you do want to exercise caution because there might be unintended consequences, right? You might release something worse than your original pest. Or it might just be a waste of money because those predators that you bought will just fly away and they won't stay in the area that you want them to stay. And then the last and final line of defense is chemical. So this involves using pesticides like herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and this also includes organic chemical control too, so any kind of chemical control. So it's important that if you are using chemicals, you use proper management and proper procedures, and you always want to read the back of the label before you use the chemical. So now we have all of these 4 parts of the pyramid, right? We have cultural, mechanical and physical, biological, and chemical. And maybe you might be noticing that there's a pattern emerging here. So the bottom of the pyramid actually is more, if you can see, here we go. So the bottom of the pyramid actually focuses more on prevention And as you move up the pyramid, we're focusing more on actual interventions that might be occurring. So in turn, the bottom of the pyramid has the least amount of input, and you have more and more input as you move up. So the goal for IPM is to start with the most preventative strategies that have the least amount of input, and then increase both intervention and input as to address the problem in a systematic way. So we want to stay near the base of the pyramid as much as possible. And this is sort of the methodology of IPM, that we start with these cultural preventative methods, and then we will move up if we have to increase the intensity of our management. So based on that short, quick introduction to IPM, I want to know if you feel as though it's easy or hard to implement IPM. So I'm launching a poll right now. And if you just want to pick one of them, the question is, how easy or hard do you feel it is to implement IPM methods to solve problems in your yard? So 1 is easy and 5 is very difficult. There's no wrong answer here. Okay, I see everyone's answers have started slowing down, so I'll end the polling here and share the results. So not surprising, we just went over the introduction here, but most of you think that, you're not quite sure yet. It's not easy, it's not hard, but there's a pretty even amount of people who also think it's pretty easy or pretty hard too. So now we're going to go through, I'll stop sharing these results, and now I'm going to go through some actual examples of what an IPM plan might look like. So we're going to start with weeds. So first we're going to look at this weed that many of you may recognize. It's called common crabgrass. So the first part of IPM, before you can have any pest or disease management plan, is you have to properly identify what you're looking at. So after properly identifying this weed, I looked it up. I used university-based resources online, and I learned that crabgrass is a summer annual weed and is usually one of the first warm season annuals to germinate in the spring. So it has hairy leaves, and it also has really fibrous roots. Common crabgrass also spreads by seeds, and it spreads by stem rootings. This tells me that it's really important to control this weed, 1, before seeds set, and 2, that actually chopping it up with my lawnmower might actually be spreading it across my lawn. So I shouldn't be running this plant over with my lawnmower. It's also important to note that the seeds of this plant remain viable in the soil for up to 3 years. So it's really important to control it before the seeds have set. So using the IPM framework on the last slide that I showed you before, sorry, I'm having a little bit of a slow internet connection, but now you should be able to see this pyramid on your screen up here. So just using the IPM framework, I filled out the pyramid before with strategies in each area. So first we have cultural, which is that bottom bar at the bottom of the pyramid. So one option is to try and shade out the areas where crabgrass might be taking over before the seeds have a chance to germinate by actually mowing at a higher height. Next, depending on the size of my lawn, this might not be possible for everybody, but you might want to do physical control where you hand weed in the early spring. So before it's become too established, you can go out there and just pull them out by the roots. There aren't any biological controls indicated for common crabgrass. And then lastly, if you have effective cultural and physical controls, you might not even need chemicals. You might not need to spray an herbicide. But if you do, make sure you read the back of the label and use an herbicide that's indicated for this specific plant. So it is important to note that many of these IPM strategies, they're not a one and done kind of activity that you would do. This would, you would increase your mowing height for many, many seasons. You would also hand weed in the early spring as a common practice. So it definitely is a long-term solution. So that was the annual plant. And now I want to look at this perennial plant that many of you might be familiar with. I even think a couple people have asked about it already in the chat box. So let's look at Creeping Charlie. So after IDing and looking up Creeping Charlie, I learned that it's an herbaceous perennial, and it's really competitive in shady sites with poorly drained soils. The leaves are kidney-shaped, and sometimes it might be confused with other weeds, but it has these small purple flowers. And Creeping Charlie gets its name because it's commonly spread by creeping stems. And that also means, again, that mowing it over is not a good idea because that might spread it around your yard too. So I filled out this pyramid again, and at the bottom we want to start with cultural. So since I looked up the weed and it thrives in poorly drained soils, possibly increasing soil organic matter by adding compost could help with long-term management. It also thrives in shady sites where our common grass species are also less competitive. So from there, it usually establishes and then spreads to our sunny sites. So there actually might be something that works better in that area. If the site is shady and moist, you might want to plant something else there. You can also try and outcompete the weed by overseeding too. Physical control for Creeping Charlie is usually a little bit more aggressive than for common crabgrass. You actually might have to dig the plant out of that area and then resod or completely, reestablish new lawn by taking the whole plant out if the site is suitable for that. There aren't any biological controls indicated for Creeping Charlie. With long-term effective cultural and physical control, again, you might not need to use chemicals, but if you do, make sure you read the label correctly. So it's important to understand the weed that you're specifically targeting, but many of you might have the general goal of just weed reduction overall, and these strategies here are a good place to start. So by changing your mowing height, overseeding, and increasing your soil health, you can do things that increase and improve photosynthesis for your plants, shade the soil by changing your mowing height, replace old grass by overseeding and eliminate bare spots where weeds might take over. And also by focusing really on soil health, you can focus on having healthy grass that will result in fewer weeds. So we talked about two weeds, an annual and perennial, and now I want to go into a pest and I want to go into a disease. So we're going to start with grubs. So white grubs are the larval stage of many different kinds of beetles. Most commonly in Illinois, it's going to be the Japanese beetles. What they are is they're soft, they have these thick brown legs here, and they're white, and they usually show up in this like C shape if you see them in your lawn. What happens is the adults lay their eggs in the summer, the grubs hatch, they feed on the roots in the fall, and then they dig deep down into the soil and overwinter, and then come back up in the spring to feed. So they usually pupate from May to June, hatch as adults to mate around June time, and the timing in general varies through the different species, but that's the most common sort of cycle in Illinois, life cycle. And I will say it is really difficult to identify what specific beetle you have unless you send it into a lab, but the management for all the white grubs in Illinois is pretty similar. So before you think about control, the first thing you have to do is scout for damage. So grub damage can often look like other things like drought stress, so discolored lawn or wilting, You might have irregular die-off in your turf. And because those symptoms can be caused by many things, you really have to scout before you actually manage for grubs. The problem is that sometimes these populations of grubs go unnoticed until you have raccoons or skunks or something else digging up your yard. So if you have this similar damage, you might want to take samples. And you take samples in a 1 foot section in the late summer when the grubs are near the surface. So you would dig a hole or use a bulb planter or something to remove a core of soil and look for grubs, and then count how many you have. If you find less than 5 in a 1 foot square, you probably don't need to worry because there's not a high enough infestation to cause too much damage. But if you find more, that's when you would consider treating them, especially if your lawn is already water stressed or something else. So using this IPM framework, I'm going to go ahead and fill it out with cultural at the bottom again. So cultural includes scouting and using good watering practices. There aren't any recommended mechanical practices for grubs because those mechanical practices would ruin your lawn. So we skip up to biological. Luckily, there are some beneficial nematodes, and there's a bacteria you can buy called milky spore that's shown to be effective against grubs. And if you have a really high infestation, you might try an insecticide. There are organic options available like neem oil, but you still have to follow the instructions on the back of the bottle really carefully. And then the disease I want to talk about is summer patch and necrotic ring spot. So these two diseases are caused by different bacteria, by different organisms, but they look really similar and they're managed similarly. And so the only way you can actually really tell them apart is to send in a sample and get it confirmed by the lab. Luckily, we have the Illinois Extension Plant Clinic that you can send samples to for a small fee that has amended hours due to our stay-at-home order. So these diseases are really often present in stress lawns, and stress lawns that have a thick thatch layer and poor soil conditions. So we've mentioned thatch a couple times, and I just want to address it specifically. So I want to mention that thatch is actually a normal part of grass growth, but when it gets too thick, that's what causes the problems. So thatch is that area of undecomposed grass roots between the grass and the soil here. So using the IPM framework, I fill out the pyramid again, and because excess thatch is the biggest problem that can lead to these diseases, increasing soil biological activity and aeration is key. So you might add compost and stop your use of synthetic fertilizers. Mechanically, you could aerate and do mechanical dethatching. There are no biological methods for these two diseases, and you could possibly use a fungicide, but addressing actually the physical problems of too much fat and low biological activity are usually more effective than fungicides, so treating the problem. So after going through these few examples, I actually want to ask you that same question from earlier again. So after learning about IPM and these examples, how easy or hard now do you find it is to implement IPM methods to solve problems in your yard? So 1, again, is easy, and 5 is the most difficult. Great, so I'll give everybody just a couple more seconds to keep answering. See, we have about 75% of people answered, so I'm gonna end the polling right now and share the results. This is what I like to see. So now after 53% of you say that using IPM methods to address the problems in your yard is pretty easy compared to, I think, before going through this section where there was only about 30% of you thought it was pretty easy. So what's great about IPM is it really just puts all the maintenance practices and things that we've talked about in this presentation together in an organized format. So you kind of have a step and you have a procedure to follow. And I think that's one of the best things about IPM. It sort of takes the guesswork out of all of this. So I'll stop sharing these results and close this out here. So next we're going to talk about beyond the lawn. So one of the goals is to reduce lawn area, and maybe that's one of yours, maybe not, but I encourage you to refer back to your assessment document that we mentioned at the beginning to ask yourself, really, is your lawn meeting your needs? And if it's not, then you might be interested in this following section. So the first thing we want to look at is beyond bluegrass. So Kentucky bluegrass is the most commonly planted lawn species in Illinois, but it requires higher amounts of irrigation and fertilizer compared to other types of grass. So if you're looking to go beyond bluegrass to have a more resilient lawn, you might consider choosing mixtures or blends rather than single species. So for a cool season, you might choose a tall fescue blend, and there's many different varieties. And then if you're looking for a warm season grass, you might choose something like buffalo grass. So if there's any folks out there located in Southern Illinois, you know, warm season grasses aren't often chosen in Northern Illinois, but there is a little bit of that in Southern Illinois that might work better for that climate. Like we said, it's all about what you want out of your property. So if your main thing is aesthetic or looks, maybe there's other beautiful options out there that you can include in your garden that might include a smaller lawn. So as you can see in this graphic here, that there's actually a lot of unused space, right? People might be sitting on this patio, but there's this whole unused space of the lawn. By planting more plants, increasing your garden area, and shrinking your lawn, you can actually add more dimension and interest while making use of that unused space. There are many alternatives to lawn. One of the handouts in your resource folder is a Pollinator Plants of Illinois handout that I encourage everyone to take a look at. So some of the alternatives we've already talked about, but they're not only beautiful, but they're also functional. So we talked about rain gardens, for example. You have a wet area where your grass doesn't grow very well. You could convert it into a rain garden here that has more plants and more dimension and also has pollinator benefits too. Or if you have a really shady site, you might consider something that's more like a woodland planting that's shown here with this picture. So our native plants, just to kind of hit home with these benefits, the native plants actually they're more resilient because of their longer root system. So I want to show you guys pictured right here, this tiny plant. This is Kentucky bluegrass. You can see that it has really shallow roots, which doesn't really provide us too many water retention benefits. But compared to over here on the other side, buffalo grass, which has really, really long roots, which also results in buffalo grass being a little bit more resilient in times of drought too. So in the last couple minutes here, before we get to questions, I want to see if anybody has any other strategies that we didn't talk about today in natural lawn care. Are there any strategies that you're using or that you've heard of that we didn't mention? Please put them in the chat box. while that stuff is coming in, we'll read them out at the end. I'm just gonna go through and show you this picture where a lot of these different strategies are sort of placed together. So the compost pile, you can see this added rain barrel here, and having your downspouts soaking in, not just going on the lawn compared to, or going on the driveway compared to this one right here, right? So we want to do things on our properties that will help manage manage water and prevent pollution. So if you go back to your assessment plan, I hope that this action plan actually makes a little bit more sense to you now after we went through all these strategies. So the example is back up here on the PowerPoint where the goal was water management. And now to address those goals, we can see that this person, right, is leaving their grass clippings, installing a rain barrel, and installing a rain gauge. So your strategies to address your goals can be really small, and it's okay to start from that place too. So here are some of the strategies that we went over. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of what we went over, but if you needed some reminders as you're filling out your sheet, here they are. So if you do have strategies that maybe we missed out on, or a strategy that you're really excited about, please put that in the chat box right now. So that's the end of our presentation here. We'll start taking questions, but here's our contact information. Mine's at the top, Abigail's and Allison's. And then if you could please fill out the evaluation using the QR code or the link that's in the top corner of the presentation. And then lastly, this program was a part of the Everyday Environment webinar series, and you can join the Energy and Environmental Stewardship team next week and the presentation on managing waste at home. So thank you everybody for attending. It is 2 and we can take some questions.
Okay, I think I have been trying to keep up with the chat box during the presentation. There may have been a few that I've missed. If I've missed your question, feel free to post it again and we can get those answered. One of the questions we received was, do you need to add nitrogen if you're using composted leaves?
The first thing I would want to do is get that soil test, but if you're not seeing any problems, then I don't think so. Gemini, do you have any additions to that?
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think I have any additions right now.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, and I just would add that composted leaves are a great natural source of nitrogen. So hopefully you won't be seeing any problems. And if you do have problems, that's when you want to think about how to address.
Yeah. The only thing with leaves you'll want to be a little careful about is keeping them out of like your storm sewers, because that does contribute to phosphorus in the waterways. So you'll want to make sure that, you know, those compost leaves that could be high in phosphorus are staying on your yard and not washing away.
Yeah, it's best to, if it's already composted, that's great. And if you are just mowing over them, a mulching mower is a great way to make sure that they break down on your lawn and stay on your lawn. And once they're on an impervious surface like a sidewalk or a street, that's when you have issues with runoff. So we had a request about having information on compost tea. So hopefully that's something we can address in the future. We had a question about what lower growing ground covers could be used instead of turf grass.
I feel like the possibilities are a little bit endless depending on what you want and your conditions on your yard.
Yes.
I would encourage going to the, I don't know if we put this in the folder, but Illinois Indiana Sea Grant has a really great like natives list that, says the heights of those plants. So I would look at that, and depending on the conditions of where you want it to grow, then I would make a decision from there. I don't think I have a very good answer if I don't know very much about the space. So.
Well, I don't quite have a specific answer to that question, but I have somewhere to point you to. So the Four Seasons team is actually doing a webinar on ground covers on July 14th. So you can visit our website, sign up for that, and I know the educator who's presenting that will have a lot of interesting ideas, alternative ground covers. I think I was also thinking about ground covers that might be micro varieties. So I know there's like micro clovers that people are using in replacement of a lawn that it's more of a lawn alternative than a traditional ground cover, but depending on what you're interested in, there are micro varieties that are available. And I'll put the link to the Four Seasons in the chat box in case you do want to register for that program on July 14th.
Yeah, if this is something, I definitely recommend the Four Seasons webinars. Gemini is one of the facilitators and managers of those webinars, and they have some really great horticultural topics that they cover, and many of those include native and natural options. So.
The next question we had was if there was any suggestions on how to treat jumping worms.
Unfortunately, there is not. I feel your pain. If whoever was asking that question right now, the Illinois, members of the Illinois Extension team are doing research on this right now, but there's not any best practices aside from being sure that if you don't have them on your property yet, being sure that you're being very diligent about where you're sourcing your plant material from. So this is a question that you would want to ask the nurseries, the growers, the greenhouses about if they have jumping worms before you bring those items into your yard. So I think the most effective strategies against jumping worm right now are really just prevention from bringing it to your yard or your lawn. And there's more research is still being done on what you can do if you actually have an established jumping worm population.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question we have here, and I do see that we are at 2:10, so I understand if folks have to drop off. And Abigail and Gemini, you let me know how much more time you want to spend answering questions. The next one that we have is overseeding and top dressing in the fall. Can you be more specific on timing, for example, before leaf fall or at the end of a fall cleanup?
Allison, I feel like I'll let you speak to that. I feel like you explain it really, really well.
Sure. So there's not a specific recommendation. You want to do these things after a fall cleanup makes a lot of sense because ideally, if you can do it after aerating, the sort of trifecta of natural lawn care is to aerate, overseed, and then top dress. And that ensures that you're getting good seed to soil contact. And when you have compost, that helps keep moisture, and you obviously need moisture to sprout your seeds. So really it's just about sort of doing those three things. And ideally, yes, I think after you've sort of cleaned up your yard is a good time to do it to make sure that you're getting seed to soil contact. We've had a question about if you can give any tips on micro clover, the best ones to use, more or less aggressive, etc.
I think I've heard that using mixtures, micro clover mixtures, are much better to use than just a single variety. But I wonder if anybody else who actually uses them or has experience using them in their yards would want to answer the question in the chat box, because that's my very general answer.
I don't have a.
Okay, and I'll put this article in the chat box from Penn State. That might be a good place for us to start and learn together.
And in the meantime, we had a question about how to get rid of vole damage.
I mean, what was the tip that Len gave earlier? Get a hawk.
Get a cat.
Yeah. You know, it's one of those things that you might want to look at, like, why is the vole attracted to that space too? Like, maybe you do have some grubs or something that the vole is attracted to eating, or I don't know. So you'll want to check on that first, and usually if something like that is there, it's eating something that's there. So that'll be the first step.
Yeah, and there's usually is it called a nest or something? So using good yard sanitation practices might prevent them from, finding a home in or close to your yard. So removing your wood piles and other debris, taking those off the ground can be helpful, because you want to, I think it's like similar to mice, where you want to eliminate their hiding spots if they have them.
I wanted to direct to the chat box. Thank you, Peggy. She also said that to treat the damage specifically, treat it like a golf divot. So that's helpful. I think we might have time for one more question if you are willing to.
I'm up for it.
All right. So let's see. I think there might just be one left that I haven't seen yet. So the question was, what mixture of non-grass plants among the lawn seed mixture are beneficial to bees in the lawn?
I mean, that micro clover, some people treat white clover as a weed. It just kind of depends on your perspectives. We kind of address that in assessment. But anything with like a flower, but that micro clover, like, bees really like, you'll just want to be sure if you are putting on any pesticides or anything, that you're not putting it on with the flower. When the flower is on, you'll want to cut those flowers off. So
awesome. I think,
and violets too. I mean, it just depends on what your tolerance is for quote unquote weeds, right? So
sure. I think with that we can wrap up. I think we've answered most of the questions in the chat box. Of course, if you have questions that weren't answered or something else comes up later, you have our contact information. We would love to have you email us and try to help you out. And so thank you so much, Abigail and Gemini, for the presentations this week. And thank you all for sticking around and asking these great questions and participating in the webinar. I'll hand it over to Abigail and Gemini if you have any closing remarks.
Nope, just check out next week, and Ashley will talk about managing waste at the home. I think it'll be a good one. So have a great afternoon, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you.